using rewards to train people to try and do other things and even like them or think they like them. It's okay to do that to ourselves if the outcome is what we want. Like we want to train ourselves to not like smoking anymore and train ourselves to like being a non-smoker, then using conditioning and rewards can be a good thing. But the opposite we're talking about here is, again, bending yourself out of shape. And, it ties back to what we were saying last week about masking. It's just people then are really often doing things that are really bad for them. They're not only not doing things that are good for them, but they're doing quite a lot of stuff that's really damaging for them. And so unmasking, at the very least, is probably identifying some of those things, and if you can, beginning to do less of them.
Is social compliance masking? Social compliance, there's a place for that, and it's a personal choice. That there are benefits, and people make a choice about how much they're willing to compromise themselves or fit in. Is not necessarily masking, because we're not saying that you have to be something different completely and not even know who you are or not show who you are. That's a whole different thing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
and in therapy as well, because for a client to be able to start talking about this, there needs to be some level of psychological safety for the client with the therapist. So in the last episode, we talked about autistic people being masked. That is, camouflaging themselves so that their autistic ways couldn't be spotted. And this week, Eoin and I talk about unmasking. That is, autistic people welcoming and being self-accepting, especially of aspects previously hidden or repressed. So, unmasking, we said we'd talk about this week, didn't we?
Yeah.
Just as initial thing, actually, what I thought of today is that we need to also be mindful of not making an assumption that every client should be unmasking. In the end, it's still a client-led thing, isn't it? It's not for the therapist to say how the client should or shouldn't be, because surely that's just as bad as the pressure and expectation in the first place for masking.
Yeah, and a way that it kind of emerged in a discussion with a client for me in the past week or so was because, they will be at that stage of having discovered that they're autistic a few months back and been thinking about it a good bit before then, as a lot of people are. And interesting, I might even mention another couple of bits about her, depending on how the conversation goes, because, it's kind of working for her. So it was exciting, the session we had. And the way we were framing it was she's learning better how to meet her real needs.
Yeah.
So it's a nice way of putting it, because you can talk about finding your true self, which can sound a little trite, or you can talk about unmasking, which sounds like almost a dangerous process, or something you have to do. But it's like finding out what actually works for you, given the options you have. You don't have infinite options. And I suppose, particularly perhaps, again, the late discovery autistic adults that we're often dealing with these days reality is a lot of life might be relatively fixed. They're not necessarily going to throw it all up in the air, but still finding out, given whatever options you have, finding out how can I just better meet my needs? So how can I better meet my social needs? We don't even have to call it unmasking, but that's actually what it is, because she would have been finding out, it really doesn't work for me when I, whatever the end of that sentence would be. It really doesn't work for me, for instance, when I don't have independent travel. For instance, a group of friends were going somewhere for a day trip. They were all going on the train. She decided to take the car, but she wouldn't have let herself do that before. And she did it because she didn't think I'm unmasking. What she did was she said, I need that. And in the last couple of months, I've discovered that it's okay to need that. And I feel permission to need it from knowing I'm autistic and reading about that. And I've permission from Eoin, so to speak, to do that, And she mentioned it to me. And I said, well, of course, if that's what you need, and it worked for her, She met them all there and they had a nice day out, and then she got in her car and drove back home. And they all went and had great fun, great crack, as we say in Ireland, on the train. But that's not what she needed.
Yeah.
she needed the other. So I just thought it's just such a simple way of seeing it in a way. There can be more to it, but it's a good start, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. That is really good, isn't it? And as well, it's not whether you do or don't go on the train with the others. It's whether that's meeting, whether you know that that's what you need. And it's unmasking if before you would have hidden that. And now you're not hiding it. You're able to be all right with it yourself. And then you're able to lead others to be all right with it. And it is all right. In the end, it is all right. Well, I mean, you can't guarantee that everything's going to be all right, because that's the other thing, isn't it? You don't just dive into unmasking in all different ways and it's always going to turn out well. There are risks.
No. And, that was one of the things that she was facing and that people can face is which will happen. Will it be fine? And actually it was in her case. Nobody cared. Fine, Grant, we'll see you there. Right, see you. No problem at all. And they all had a good day, which is nice. And she also felt this means I'm meeting the right people, because some of these were new people for her, But equally what could happen and what happens that leads people to mask as they grow up is people saying, no, that's silly, or don't be a spoil sport, or she'll miss out on all the fun, or that's a real strange. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to take your car? That's a bit odd, And then you think, okay, I better get the train. And in fact, maybe I better even start pretending I like it, And that's what leads us back into what we mean by masking and unmasking,
Yeah. And if being on that train causes you to feel stressed and headachy and disorientated, say, from the noise, the lights, the movement, masking again would be about pretending that's not happening, pretending that's not your experience, not wanting to show it. You literally are camouflaging, aren't you? It's in varying degrees. It's in the choices you make. It can be in the behaviors. It can be the things that communicate. It can be the not showing the real goings on to others and even to yourself. So it's like, how deep does this go?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, people can even start thinking, maybe that isn't really what I want. This is what I want, because that's just so weird. It couldn't be, or they kind of try and train themselves to like the thing other people like, as we talked about last week, twist themselves out of shape. Yeah.
That's a really interesting comment that you just made, actually. Train themselves to want certain things or to like certain things or believe that they like certain things. We'll open up that on another day, shall we? Because that's massive.
It is. I know. And it ties in with children sometimes experience in terms of applied behavioral analysis and things like that, using rewards to train people to try and, do other things and even like them or think they like them, And, it's okay to do that to ourselves if the outcome is what we want. Like we want to train ourselves to not like smoking anymore and train ourselves to like being a non-smoker, then using conditioning and rewards can be a good thing. But the opposite we're talking about here is, again, bending yourself out of shape. And, it ties back to what we were saying last week about masking. It's just people then are really often doing things that are really bad for them. They're not only not doing things that are good for them, but they're doing quite a lot of stuff that's really damaging for them. And so unmasking, at the very least, is probably identifying some of those things, and if you can, beginning to do less of them. I mean, I was saying last week that, I think we got a couple of comments on this as well. People might, if they're lucky, be masking least with their families. They're not always. They might be masking a lot at work, but they might still choose to. So friends then become a big part of the unmasking territory for a lot of autistic people, I think, because that's the in-between territory where you are masking a lot sometimes, but you don't want to be, because why live that way? Why be masking so much with people who are your friends, or you hope are your friends, So I do think that they're beginning to pick some of the things. I mean, a classic thing that is really bad for some autistic people is forcing themselves and being sometimes under pressure from other people to stay late at social occasions, because sometimes it takes autistic people 3 days to recover from an experience like that. If they go to a wedding or something and people are saying, stay on, and they're there till 3 a.m, they're literally recovering for days,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can sort of see, can't you, when you start to deny that you even have those experiences, you're denying it to yourself, because that's the way that you're able to carry on and do the things. You can see, can't you, how that might actually become psychosomatic things, how it can lead to not only anxiety and depression, say, or sleeplessness, or a burnout potentially, but also how it can actually get pushed into other things. As you say, these are things that are really bad for us, not just that we're not doing things that are good for us, but that we can be doing things that are really bad for us.
And I think that is, even as we talk it out here, I think it's a good distinction. Maybe it's okay to start doing less of what's bad for you and more of what's good for you. And I think we should come to the more of what good's for you in a few minutes, because that is the other side of it. But less of what's bad for you is just a good starting point, because why wouldn't you? And the thing there is that and this was the bit that, we were talking out, myself and this client, is, that does mean getting better at identifying your needs.
Yeah.
And the other interesting point that she made was, that doesn't automatically pop out in its entirety because you're autistic. There's a lot of clues in, well, if I'm autistic, then it's quite likely this and this. But it's not like I have exactly the same needs as every other autistic person. So it's still, with the guidelines of, well, what does it mean to be autistic, roughly speaking, it's still a very personal process of, what do I need? What works for me? What's bad for me, for a start, that I really need to see, can I do less of and engage less in? And then, even more, what actually do I need that will make my life better, fulfill me, make me happier, be easy.
And it is so individual. Yeah, because I'm just thinking as well, it's too oversimplifying it to say, because there's all the myths about autism as well, about how that they're loners, or they don't like socializing or something. What if you do like socializing? What if you want to be on the train and that's a big part of it for you because you work a lot on your own or something like that, and you really want the laughing and joking and the friendship and the connections about sitting on the train, because once you get into the concert you're not going to be able to hear each other. You want that bit on the train example. First, that's going to be very nourishing for me, and I want that bit. It might be about, how am I going to be able to have it? What do I need to consider to be able to make it meet my needs, and in what ways might what has to give before and after? What do I need to consider? And then that takes us into, how do we start to get life on our terms? How do we start to have social life and get it on our terms in a collaborative way, rather than a defiant or blunt way?
And Rachel's just making an interesting point there in the chat, which is there can also be a process of unmasking in one's own company. That's a really important piece. I entirely agree. And like I was talking about friends and family and work, but like even to just be able to be more yourself and meet your own needs, and do less of the things that are bad for you and more of the things that are good for you. And you like, even when there's nobody else to take into consideration. Now, I think there always are other people to take into consideration in our heads. That's why people are still masked in their own company, I think, is that they're still trying to go according to whatever they've learned they should be, But people can even when there's nobody else around, late discovery autistic and other neurodivergent adults can still be not really living the life they want,
Because when you think, I always think about masking as being like, act like everyone expects, like it's like, and everyone includes me. I'm a person in society as well. So when I act like everyone expects, am I one of those everyone's? What do I think everyone should be acting like in these situations? Very individual, isn't it? Because you've got that internalized stigma as well.
Totally. It's again one of the points that I'm really getting strongly out of the Amy Pearson and Kieran Rose book, is the depth of that internalized stigma, the sense that like people who are in stigmatized minorities don't automatically let go of that kind of vigilance around trying to be appropriate and the right kind of person just because they're on their own, like the inner police can be still just as active, kind of. Yeah, it's almost like you have to keep being that way because that keeps you in practice almost. You can't just let it lapse. And sometimes that's even conscious. Again, I was referring to, I think, Pete Warmby and special interest and things like last time, but or the time before. But it's like the kind of one of the examples that he talks about is like loving Lego as a child and then loving it for the rest of his life, but putting it to one side because people thought it was stupid, and then you're faced with the, do I do it at the weekend when nobody knows, or is it safer not to? Because people will ask you, what did you do at the weekend? And then you look shifty because you actually played Lego for hours, and then you'll feel, will I let it slip out? And so sometimes it's almost like, well, actually I do have to take other people's expectations into account because people are nosy about your life, so I better just have a good report to give of how I spent my weekend. But a lot of the time it's much deeper than that. I think what you're describing, it's just we've just slipped into what we figure is probably a good version of the life you're supposed to live, and almost think, well, possibly even think, well done us, as in, God, do you know what? I'm nearly normal,
How is a human being meant to be? We've perhaps all got our own template about that. How is a human like me meant to be? That is the camouflage suit that I'm putting on with,
Well, it's something that, I think I might have mentioned last time again, the idea of a sort of a template, or what Damien Milton, the psychologist who came up with the double empathy idea, he talks about the normalization agenda.
I love that paper.
Yeah, there's a great article on it with it. I think, in fact, I think we talked about it before. Yeah. It goes very deep and it's very insidious. And I mean, that's a general important point about society for everybody. It's just that minorities suffer most from it. That normalization agenda, that sense of, well, look, if you want the goods of society, if you want people to like you, if you want a relationship, if you want respect, if you want a good job and to get promoted, if you want the things that most people want at some level, now maybe you don't even quite want that version, but if you want somehow to have a good life on this planet and they're not going to go somewhere else, well then, you'd better just normalize yourself a bit, and that, again, Kieran Rose talks about the double consciousness idea in race studies in the US and so on. There's this notion that, that isn't just about changing your outside. You've got to bend yourself out of shape inside for that to be anyway successful, obviously, using that term ironically, but it does mean, and the thing is that it sometimes at some level delivers some of that. You now have a friend group. How real they are is another matter because you're not being real. You now have a job, how much again you're masking and to keep it, and how exhausting it might be, and how likely you are to burn out is another matter. But it's the pressure is immense, really, for most people.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that you are not interested in social harmony and compliance necessarily, because that's everybody's choice as to what they believe in and how they want to be. But I think that the thing about the normalization agenda was that there's an underlying assumption there, isn't there, that normal equals healthy. So, and normal means typical, so if you're typical, that makes you normal, and normal is healthy. If you're not that, then you're not a normal human being. You're not a healthy human being. But actually, social compliance, there's a place for that, and it's a personal choice, that there are benefits and people make a choice about how much they're willing to compromise themselves or fit in. Is not necessarily masking, because we're not saying that you have to be something different completely and not even know who you are or not show who you are. That's a whole different thing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And in therapy as well, because for a client to be able to start talking about this, there needs to be some level of psychological safety for the client with the therapist, because it can be embarrassing, it can be really uncomfortable, and these assumptions that are held in the collective unconscious, they're sometimes just like undercurrents, aren't they? They're just vibes. They're not like openly saying, oh no, you can't talk about the strange things you do, or you can't be strange. Most people would actually say that openly, but it's what they give out in an energetic form potentially that can be picked up.
Yeah, people are just uncomfortable in some way, and and don't understand you. Because, as we talked about last week, the masking process goes back early. It's not something that just suddenly happens when you step into adult life and you do it consciously. So, it's just like, we all prefer, if we say something, that people look at us with interest rather than with puzzlement. And we certainly prefer, if we say something we think is funny, that people look at us with amusement and not with puzzlement, and like, that's all it takes, is people looking a bit awkward or uncomfortable or puzzled or, lost for us to start thinking, well, that's not a good track to go down. That doesn't work. That I better try something different. I better shift my strategy, And, it was interesting what you're saying about the compliance thing, that we all need to do in society. It's like, again, the language of masking and so on, I often think over adaptation is a useful term. Like, everyone needs to adapt, but over adaptation means damage, that's what I mean by over adapted, it means, and like we would mean in therapy in general, it means like we've caused damage to ourselves that hopefully is needless damage. But for us, for autistic people growing up in modern society, to have to adapt so much out of what's our genuine, reasonable comfort zone is very sad, and also is dangerous to survival. I mean, it's, at the very least, as we talked about last week, it causes huge burnout. The bit I think we didn't touch on last time was the very high suicide rate amongst autistic people. And again, if you never fully know what that's about, it's a hard thing to fully research accurately. Obviously, people taking their own lives, but knowing what we know in general about people's attempts to take their own lives, that'll it must be at least partly driven by a sense of, my life isn't worth living. But then,
it's not worth.
If you're not living your life and a purposeful, meaning life, well, then why would it be worth living if it's so hard? So. We've got to see masking as some of the culprit there, I think.
And so when clients start to realize these kinds of things and start to feel a desire to get in touch with their own needs, to meet those needs, to accommodate the needs, and at least to be aware of them, at least to take them into consideration, and then be able to choose which ones they meet and don't meet, rather than just by habit or feeling under threat to suppress the whole lot, but to choose instead, then a lot of the time, because it started in childhood as a strategy to manage threat and getting needs met, then it can be like, by the time they come into therapy, they don't even realize often when they're doing it. So how do you facilitate that as the therapist? Where do you start? What has to happen?
Yeah, I think that is the other big bit to say a bit more about. All right. As you say, the sense of safety can't be taken for granted for a start. That needs to be looked at and developed. And also, what about any unconscious reactions we might have that might indicate any bit of puzzlement or disapproval or things like that might continue to trigger, what got this process started. I suppose, to what extent are some of those dynamics playing out in the therapeutic relationship. And that's fine. They should, but we also need then to be able to identify them and move beyond them. So that's a very important piece. I mean, it might even be worth talking about in its own right at some stage, maybe as part of a broader discussion of the therapeutic relationship. It's just like, what's going on potentially in any therapeutic relationship that might need extra attention if what we're dealing with is this phenomenon, the late discovery masked autistic adult, and a bit of it is that it's that there's no reason to think that the person's going to suddenly be able to, or even know how to, or even be properly fully aware of what it means to unmask in the session, to be their real self. They'll just be whatever they bring, and they may feel more comfortable. And the fact that we say we work with this area, whatever, may mean that already some of that is coming down, but there are lots of it not only isn't, but like with any traumatized client, because there's overlap between masking and trauma, like with any client, we wouldn't even want them to drop it all suddenly, we'd want them to gradually feel their way forward and gain trust.
Yeah, because it's about them being in control of their lives and themselves, isn't it? And hopefully have some impact on influencing situations and social interactions. So my view of that kind of thing is to gain awareness, self-insight, understanding dynamics and so on. That's the way I'd go about it. So I'd certainly be validating, how masking in the first place was dead handy, how great it was that you did protect yourself and that you found this way, and that there's new ways perhaps open to you. We just need to be finding them that are unique to you in your situations and how you like to go about things. And it might be different in different times with different people on different days, but if you don't know the ways in the first place in which you are masking, then, where do you start? So it's like being able to perhaps reflect on things, tracking it back to, well, perhaps I was not. What phrase did you use earlier about meeting your needs? I can't remember what you said now, but something about, is this right for me, or does this suit me?
Yeah, well, is it actually bad for me, and causing harm, and or what would be good for me in this situation? What would at least not be bad for me? Or
if I think about doing it again, I just think, oh no, I've got to go through all that. Then that's an indication, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. I think things that feel like and are high energy drain are a very interesting signal, and things that are just scary and unnecessarily scary. I mean, obviously exams are scary, but we might have to do them. But things that we shouldn't need to be scared of. Why are we doing them then if they cause those feelings? A thing that occurred to me there as you were talking was that I've seen, I hadn't kind of consciously noticed I'd seen it, but if I look back at some clients, the stuff we talk about, maybe we'll talk about it another time here, but when we're training and so on around the practical possible accommodations for an autistic client, which may not be needed, they may not need to kind of be given permission to stim in the session, but it might be nice if they are, in case they want to, or being told, well, like, you can communicate very straight with me, don't worry, say anything. Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing, the how would you like to communicate outside sessions? Is email all right? All those things that, people don't usually do with them. They don't usually say, look, I'm okay with checking out what works for you. I actually think that in some cases, I'm thinking back, I think has given some of my clients a bit of permission to go more into the unmasking process, because they're already, without us naming it, I've never named it as this before, we're already saying, you can drop things that you usually worry about here and that would be good for you, but that you don't do because people think they're strange. You can do them here. If there's anything that's bad for you that you often do, and you don't do it because people will feel uncomfortable, well then please let's look at you doing it here. If there's anything that's good for you, hopefully we can do it. If we can't, well, we can't, like already you're saying,
and that might start the conversation, mightn't it? Because they might say, well, wow, that's amazing, or whatever. That's something, because I wouldn't have done that in XYZ situation. That gives you then the lead in to explore it as well, doesn't it?
It does,
Oh, how come? Have you had that before? And what runs through your mind as you think about that then?
I mean, I think we have to do that to even make therapy possible for some autistic clients. And that's why it's important to have a bit of a feel for that. But more subtly, I think it also begins to give permission for unmasking, maybe even in the wider world, as in, well, let's start here, The other thing, just quickly, that said, maybe come back to us, just, at least if you're doing less of what's bad for you that you don't need to be doing, that's good. But I mean, it'd be nice to do loads of stuff that's good for you as well. And you know, that is the other lovely side of unmasking, is the beginning to discover things you absolutely love, you know, special interests that you neglected, things you loved as a child that you thought you had better stop doing, things you always wanted to do and never did because no one else did them and people thought they were nerdy and stupid. So, you know, that can be, you know, it's not always hobbies and interests. It even could be a change of career, but certainly in the area of interests and activities, it's you know, it's lovely to watch sometimes. Late discovery, autistic adults just thinking, yeah, I always wanted to do that. In fact, I'm going to do it, you know. I'm going to do it even if no one else does it, you know, because I like it and that's it, you know. It's good for me. I enjoy it, you know. Life is short, you know, bucket list time, you know. So I think that's lovely piece.
Yeah, and it's really about the individual, isn't it? Because I think as well, you know, there's that temptation sometimes to contribute to the political cause, you know, because obviously if, as all autistic people talk about unmasking, and it does get talked about a lot in autistic communities, but even so, you can't just throw yourself under the train here. You can't just like give up your whole life for the political cause. It's a personal choice how much you do and don't. But there can be pressure sometimes as well because, you know, it's about breaking stereotypes. It's about advocating for rights in general for autistic people, you know, and for promoting inclusivity and what have you, and acceptance. But it's still, at the end of the day, yes, we all would like to contribute to that cause, but we also have an entitlement to privacy, pacing, and, you know, you do what you want. You do as much as you want in the end, and don't feel under pressure to be showing people that you're unmasking. It's not about that. It's about what is meeting your needs. We're coming back to that phrase that you said in the beginning.
I think it parallels some of the experience that people can have in the LGBTQ community as well. You know, it's like there's you know, political, you know, activism and even just plain ordinary visibility, like maybe going to a pride march, is important, but not everybody's ready for that. And some people will never be ready for it, you know. It's
personal, isn't it?
They'll open up to whoever they need to open up to about their gender identity or their sexual orientation or whatever, but they just, it's not going to meet their needs. It is going to be bad for them to be feeling like, yeah, that has to mean a big sort of, you know, coming out to the world and being very open and very, very vocal about this. Yeah, that's a very important point.
It is, yeah. And it might just be at this time, for me at this time in these situations, and that may or may not change at any time in the future.
Yeah. I mean, that applies also for autistic therapists, which again is something we might talk about another day. Being an autistic therapist, you know, because I've certainly looked at that issue carefully over the years and been careful about that sort of, and advocacy and so on, you know, and I've gradually felt my way into more openness and more advocacy, but I haven't rushed into it, you know. There was plenty to be done, you know. Yeah, so it'd be a good topic, yeah.
And so exciting, loads to talk about. What do you think we should talk about next week?
Yeah, have something on top of mind.
I mean, advocacy or being an autistic therapist are two good things. Political cause, there's all kinds of things.
I mean, maybe even just political awareness for the therapist, because there is a political aspect to all of this.
Yeah,
and you know, we should have some awareness around it.
Yes, definitely.
You know, that this is a kind of a political issue of its time. You know, at some level.
Because that could help therapists to really consider that whole bigger picture, you know, the macro level of stuff.
Yeah,
and start to examine where they are positioning themselves in that, and whether they want to change that positionality.
Yeah. I think that'd be a good one. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, sure. We'll see. We'll leave it there for today anyway.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us again. It's good to see you.
Yeah. Thanks, folks. Good workshop. Yeah. Okay, great stuff. Great. All right. Yeah, we'll be around for the month anyway, so we hopefully see you again. Bye.